Quiet Riot didn't just change rock history, they accidentally set themselves up for complete self-destruction. Mental health made them famous overnight, but what happened next was pure chaos. And Quiet Riot wasn't exactly an overnight success. How they weren't even a US success at first. Formed in 1973 by a couple teenage rockers with big dreams, Randy Rhoads, the guitar wizard in training, and Kelly Garney, the bass player who would later get replaced by Rudy Sarzo. The band spent years grinding it out on the Sunset Strip. They played their asses off, but for all that effort, they hit a wall every damn time they tried to break through in the States. And instead, they got stuck with the consolation prize. 2 albums that only saw the light of day in Japan. Released in 1978, Quiet Riot and Quiet Riot 2 might have well been bootlegs in their own backyard because nobody in America could find a copy. By 1979, the Dream was on life support. And then, like a plot twist that nobody saw coming, Randy got the call that changed everything. Ozzy Osbourne, fresh out of Black Sabbath and trying to put together a solo band, wanted him in the group. So Randy packs up his polka dot guitar and joined Ozzy's band, bringing along his old bandmate Rudy Sarzo not long after. And with that, Quiet Riot was done, at least for the moment. Kevin DuBrow, however, wasn't about to sit around moping. He launched a new band called DuBrow, which was basically Quiet Riot under a different name, minus the one guy who had made the band sound so legendary. Sarzo, meanwhile, bounced between projects to make ends meet, even playing in a group called Angel. But when he got the chance to shred with Randy again in Ozzy's band, he jumped at it, never realizing just how massive that gig would become, though the opportunity to play with an old friend and finally get paid was a no-brainer. As for how this whole circus started in the first place, according to Kevin DuBrow, it wasn't some fated meeting of musical soulmates. It was Hollywood. And Hollywood in the 70s meant a lot of bands, a lot of drinking, and a lot of guys just trying to get laid. DuBrow was just another dude hanging around hoping to catch a break when he got a call from somebody claiming Randy Rhoads wanted him as a singer. His first response? Who the hell's Randy Rhoads? But one phone call later, they bonded over their mutual love for Montrose's first album, and that right there was enough. They had a band. It just took another decade for the rest of the world to care. Before mental health blew up in 1983 and made Quiet Riot look like an overnight sensation, there were already battle-scarred veterans of the rock scene. Veterans that nobody in the US had really heard of. Back in '78, before hair metal was even a thing, Quiet Riot had those 2 albums out. But at that point in time, the industry was a totally different beast. Labels weren't in the business of giving every long-haired, spandex-clad Sunset Strip act a shot. Unlike today, when bands tease singles out for months before dropping an album, the label might not even bother pushing a single until the album was already out, sometimes never at all. So while Quiet Riot had 2 full albums under their belt, and a guitar player, Randy Rhoads, who was destined to become a legend, they might as well have been playing to a brick wall for US recognition. But for those in the know, those 6 diehards who managed to track down Japanese imports or catch them on the strip, their story had already been written long before that album, Mental Health, ever even saw the day. And Kevin DuBrow had to sit back and watch as his old guitar player skyrocketed to rock god status, while he remained stuck in a musical purgatory, screaming into the void. Randy Rhoads had gone from struggling to get a Quiet Riot album released in the US to playing for Ozzy and revolutionizing metal guitar. And Kevin was left behind, watching his band go up in smoke as his former bandmate became a legend. But Kevin DuBrow wasn't the kind of guy to sit back and just pack it in. After Quiet Riot collapsed in '79, he slapped his own last name on the marquee, desperately trying to keep that dream alive. But the problem was, nobody gave a damn. The industry saw them as yesterday's news, another Sunset Strip band that didn't make it the first time around and probably never would. So for a couple years, he slogged through club gigs, fighting to make something happen while the whole world was losing its mind over Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. But by 1982, something shifted. Kevin had finally put together a lineup that didn't feel like a leftover, half-baked version of Quiet Riot. It felt like a real band. Frankie Banali was on drums, Carlos Cavazo was handling guitar duties, and Chuck Wright was on the bass. It was tight, it was powerful, and it sure as hell wasn't just DuBrow anymore. So Kevin made the call. He wanted the Quiet Riot name back. During a break from Ozzy's tour, Randy Rhoads and Rudy Sarzo reconnected with Kevin, and that's when he floated the idea. Would you guys mind if I renamed DuBrow as Quiet Riot? Randy didn't just approve, he gave his blessing, and so did Sarzo. Although Quiet Riot was gone on paper, in spirit it was just waiting to be reborn when the moment was right. But there was still a missing piece. A guitar player who could bring the fire. Enter Carlos Cavazo. His old band Snow had been one of those hard rock hopefuls grinding it out on the strip. But when they fizzled out, Cavazo found himself wondering what the hell came next. And then the phone rang. It was Kevin. He said, "Hey, we're looking for a guitar player. Want to come on down?" Simple as that. Having seen the original Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads and knowing the scene, he didn't view the guys as washed-up has-beens. And so he joined up, unaware that the scrappy second-shot version of Quiet Riot was about to flip the script on everything. Then there was Sarzo, who had been in Quiet Riot before, back in the Randy Rhoads days, only to have his career veer off to playing on the biggest stages with Ozzy. But after Randy's tragic death in 1982, Rudy had lost his passion for the stage, until one day he walked into a rehearsal room with Kevin DuBrow and Frankie Banali, and something about being with his old friends reignited his spark. With Carlos already there, the three pressed on without a record deal, money, or any form of guarantee of success at all. And the album that became Metal Health wasn't even greenlit. It was recorded on what's called spec time, meaning the studio let them use the space without a budget, hoping that the band would eventually land a deal in order to pay it off. For Rudy Sarzo, it was a leap into the unknown, leaving one of the biggest bands on the planet to risk it all with a group that had already failed once. But as it turned out, this time they were about to hit the jackpot. By the early 80s, Quiet Riot wasn't just a band, it was an inside joke to the record industry. Every major label in America had passed on them. Epic? Nope. Columbia? Hard pass. Even the label that signed them in Japan wanted nothing to do with them stateside. The music industry had already decided that this kind of hard rock was dead. Dinosaur music. Relics from a pre-punk, pre-new wave world. And the smug executives were more than happy to remind bands like Quiet Riot that they just had no future. Peter Philbin, an executive at Elektra, bluntly declared, "Quiet Riot? Everyone passed on them. They're a shitty band." Rudy Sarzo recalled label after label just slamming the door in their face. It didn't matter that they'd put out 2 albums, built a name, packed clubs. They weren't new wave, they weren't post-punk, and they sure as hell weren't going to get signed. The Sunset Strip was overflowing with hungry bands, and competition was very cutthroat. According to Ron Keel from Keel fame, he said, "Somebody gets a record deal? Screw those guys. We're all jealous. I want that. I want that car. I want that girl. I want those drugs. I want that crowd." And for years, Quiet Riot was on the losing end of the spectrum. Enter Spencer Proffer, a producer hustling his way through the industry, making just enough money to keep the gears turning. And one day, while driving around L.A., he heard Slade's "Come On Feel the Noise" on the radio, sandwiched between the Police's Roxanne and Soft Cell's Tainted Love. And it hit him like a brick. This was participatory rock, a song that demanded an audience to join in rather than simply nod along. So Spencer thought if he could just find a band to do it, maybe he could get CBS to actually take him seriously. So he starts making calls, and he got a tip about a band called DuBrow playing at the country club in Reseda, fronted by a loudmouth named Kevin DuBrow, known for being over the top and animated, a guy who definitely knew how to work the crowd. So Spencer shows up, watches them, and saw his angle. Later, he returned to the same venue, came backstage, and laid it on thick, showering them with praise as he presented his proposal. He said, "Guys, I'll give you the studio time if you record one song I think could be a hit. I'll record 3 of yours. I'll pay for it. I'll record it. I'll try to push it through the system with CBS Records." But what Spencer hadn't grasped was just how many times Quiet Riot had already been rejected. They were the band that nobody wanted. Then, in his own Pasha music house, a working-class rock factory where the band had to grind through sessions as if punching a time clock. All they had to do was record one song that he wanted. With no one else knocking, DuBrow and company said, "Oh, hell yeah," even though there was no record deal or budget yet. It was basically a high-stakes IOU to the studio. And the band had to knock out the first 4 tracks of what would become Metal Health in a single weekend. No second chances, no drawn-out perfectionism, just get in, rip through it, and get the hell out. And the stakes were high. Rudy Sarzo, who had left one of the biggest groups in the world to take this risk, summed it up, basically saying if this gamble flopped, they would be right back to where they started, rejected by every major label in town. Though Carlos Cavazo had some really big shoes to fill, he brought a nice, riff-heavy, no-nonsense style that focused over power, over intricacy. And really, he was a big key to Quiet Riot's sound in terms of being able to turn it into this stadium-worthy wrecking ball of big hooks that really left its mark. And Frankie Banali, of course, wasn't just the drummer. He brought enough power to turn their material into something that could blast through stadium speakers as well. But then came that song, the one that the band made a deal to record in exchange for studio time. Quiet Riot did not want to record Come On Feel the Noise in the first place. It was Spencer's idea, and they really were not feeling it. For one thing, it wasn't their song. And so they actually got to the point where they decided to sabotage it. They planned to tank the recording, playing it so horribly that Proffer just couldn't use it. So the band blew through it. Well, lo and behold, Spencer loved it and said, "Man, I wish we got that on tape." And the engineer grinned and said, "Actually, I was rolling the tape, and we got it." And that right there turned out to be pure magic. The one take, barring background vocal overdubs and guitar solo overdubs, and it became their breakthrough hit. And Proffer's slick, radio-friendly approach provided the polish needed to sneak it past industry gatekeepers, a compromise that would ultimately help make them legends. So now Spencer, with his 4 tracks, was ready to shop the band. So he flew to New York and set up a full-scale pitch meeting at CBS. He gathered every major exec into a conference room, played the 4 recorded songs, building up to the knockout punch of Come On Feel the Noise, and waited for the magic moment. And instead, a note was passed to him. "Spencer, we hate this," is what it said. So then he tried shopping the record label to label, but every single one passed. With nowhere else to turn, Spencer made one last desperate call to Walter Yetnikoff, the head of CBS. And he said, "You guys signed me because you thought I had vision. Let me finish this record you all hate and put it out." Walter, between his legendary benders, simply shrugged and said, "All right, well, go ahead." Against every piece of industry logic, Spencer Proffer finished the album that would become Metal Health. The executives did not believe in it, the industry didn't believe in it, but Spencer Proffer did. Beyond all the headbanging anthems, Metal Health wasn't solely about brute force. Hidden in its track list was Don't Want to Let You Go, a power ballad that proved Quiet Riot could do more than just stomp and shout. And the track actually had all the makings of a second smash hit. But for whatever reason, it never got the push. Still, its sophisticated edge and Carlos Cavazzo's slick chord work showed a level of finesse that most bands lumped into the hair metal scene couldn't touch. If Come On Feel the Noise was a sing-along anthem that packed arenas, Bang Your Head Metal Health was the primal war cry, the one that made you want to smash a beer can against your forehead and jump off your couch like you were on stage at the Forum. The funny thing is, it almost never became Metal Health at all. Originally, it was No More Booze, which is a title ripped straight from Rudy Sarzo's tour diary when he was on the road with Ozzy in the UK, which, considering the absolute circus that was Ozzy's drinking and drug days, must have been one hell of a statement. But somewhere along the way, it morphed into something bigger, becoming Metal Health, a title that sounded more like a manifesto or movement, and a damn near prophecy for what Quiet Riot was about to unleash on the music world. And Spencer knew he had a monster on his hands. But radio? They were not convinced. Program directors gave it the cold shoulder at first, treating it just like another screaming metal tune from a band nobody thought would amount to much. But Spencer wasn't about to let it die in obscurity. He went to war, cutting deals, working the phones, and forcing the track onto the airwaves until people had no choice but to pay attention. And when they did, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, every band grinding it out on the Sunset Strip had a shot at the big leagues. Metal Health didn't just blow open the doors, it kicked them off the hinges. Now, the thing about Kevin DuBrow is that he wasn't just a loudmouth on stage, he was also very obsessive in the studio. Every vocal take had to be just right. He would push and tweak and redo every inflection until it matched what he was looking for, burning through studio hours at Pasha Music House, on spec time, basically where every minute cost money that they just did not have. But they pulled it off. So with the album out, Metal Health hit the shelves on March 11, 1983, and it wasn't an immediate inferno. It took 32 brutal weeks to claw its way back to the top, dethroning the Police's Synchronicity after a 17-week reign in November of 1983. At first, it barely made a dent. Unlike Def Leppard's Pyromania, which had the major label machine cranking from day one, Metal Health built its audience from scratch. And for one thing, the band wasn't a household name. Most people had not heard of them, and the label was still hesitant. In terms of a single, Come On Feel the Noise, destined to be their biggest hit, wasn't released until July of 1983, 4 months after the album's debut, because nobody thought it was worth pushing. But slowly and steadily, the album crept up the charts. And by November, Come On Feel the Noise had cracked the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, propelling the album to number 1 for a week. And it wasn't just a win for Quiet Riot, it was a seismic shift for heavy metal all around. I mean, usually slots like that were meant for pop, rock, mainstream-friendly acts. Metal Health proved that a loud, rowdy, fist-pumping metal band could defy expectations and actually top the charts, opening the floodgates for a lot of hair metal bands just waiting in the wings. And Quiet Riot's ascent wasn't built on industry faith, it was forged from sheer luck and stubborn grit. And then the MTV miracle happened. Les Garland, head of programming at MTV, called Spencer one day, said, "Hey man, you got a really cool record happening in Texas and Oklahoma. Would you give me a video?" And Spencer didn't hesitate. He grabbed a camera crew, scraped together 19 grand, and shot the Mental Health video at the California Institute of the Arts. It was an unhinged rock spectacle. Kevin DuBrow raging inside a padded cell, decked out in the red straitjacket and face mask from the album cover, breaking free to join with the band on stage, with a crew of rowdy CalArts students playing the role of an unruly audience. Initially relegated to MTV's graveyard shift at 3 a.m., the video set off a chain reaction. Phones exploded with viewer calls, and within days, MTV moved it to midnight. Suddenly, CBS Records, the very company that had once laughed them out of the building, scrambled to keep up with demands as Mental Health sold 500,000 copies. For years, Quiet Riot had been that struggling Sunset Strip band, but after Mental Health went nuclear, they transformed from club act to arena headliner in less than a year. On May 29, 1983, Kevin DuBrow stood at the Glen Helen Regional Park stage before 300,000 people and shouted out, "Bang your head!" And for a guy who'd spent a decade getting rejected, that moment was the ultimate middle finger to all those who doubted him. By the end of '83, Quiet Riot was opening for Black Sabbath in front of 15,000 people a night. And soon they weren't just opening for the legends, they were the headliners, embodying heavy metal in America all the way. But success brought its own demons. Kevin DuBrow's arrogance, once a part of his charm, turned into a career-wrecking liability. On stage, in interviews, he trashed other bands, called them posers, claimed that Quiet Riot had paved the way for all the glam metal. Even as Mötley, Crüe, and Riot and others rose alongside them. Spencer Proffer had remembered back to the fact that the success of Mental Health had made Kevin feel untouchable. He said that Kevin would rant about how other bands only got deals because of Quiet Riot. And because of that, Spencer actually had to do a whole hell of a lot of damage control. And even Kevin's own bandmates were growing weary. Frankie Banali later said that Kevin was becoming his own worst enemy. And everything that he was saying in the press was actually making it harder for the band to be able to keep up momentum. And now infamous interview in which DuBrow publicly trashed climbing bands, calling them copycats and manufactured garbage, just totally sealed his fate. Industry execs began shutting doors. Barely 6 months into their peak, CBS Records was demanding a follow-up album. Burnout from touring and rushed back in the studio without time to properly craft new material, the band delivered 1984's Condition Critical, which was pretty much kind of a carbon copy of Mental Health, but lacking a bit of its fire. The first single was another Slade cover, Mama, We're All Crazy Now, a desperate attempt to cash in on Come On Feel the Noise, and it flopped. At least relatively. I mean, the album still went double platinum, but compared to Mental Health, it was a major disappointment. And DuBrow's finger-pointing at the record label only made matters worse. By 1986, Quiet Riot was circling the drain. Rudy Sarzo had already bailed, foreseeing the inevitable collapse. Their third album, QR3, tanked hard, barely getting gold status, and receiving only a tiny bit of radio play at best. And the thing is, the labels and radio stations just didn't even want to deal with Kevin anymore. Frankie Banali said that they went from being the biggest band in the world to struggling for radio play, all basically due to Kevin's big mouth. And by the end of 1987, the unthinkable happened. Quiet Riot fired Kevin DuBrow. His own bandmates, their label, management had reached their breaking point. And Quiet Riot limped on with new singers, rotating lineups, but they'd never again reach the heights of Mental Health. But if Quiet Riot kicked the door down with that album, suddenly major labels would see dollar signs and hairspray and spandex. Mötley Crüe's Shout at the Devil dropped just months later, riding that wave of renewed heavy rock interest. I covered that one in detail as well. Rat, Poison, Bon Jovi all got major label deals that probably wouldn't have materialized, or at least not in the same way, without Mental Health providing that backbone, proving that metal actually could sell. By 1986, the entire Sunset Strip was being ransacked by A&R reps, desperate to sign the next Quiet Riot. Dee Snider, Twisted Sister, even acknowledged Quiet Riot's impact, basically saying that they didn't get enough credit. They were actually discredited. But as far as D was concerned, Quiet Riot should have been immortalized for carrying that glitter rock lamb torch, putting out independent records, going into Japan, doing everything they could, and finally, against all odds, just breaking through. The irony was that Quiet Riot opened the gates, yet couldn't stick around to enjoy the empire they had actually helped build. Bands like Bon Jovi and Poison took what they started and just ran with it, eventually surpassing them in fame and fortune. Quiet Riot's time at the top was brief, but its influence was massive. And while Quiet Riot never repeated Metal Health's success, the noise they made never really faded. The one album changed metal forever, proving that loud guitars, screaming vocals, stadium-sized choruses weren't meant only for the underground. They took metal from the clubs to number one, and from then on, nothing would ever be the same again. So for you metalheads out there, I left a couple links for Mötley Crüe, Too Fast for Love, and also Shout at the Devil, which I covered in depth. To my subscribers, thank you. You just freaking rock. And if you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet, bang your head right into that subscribe button one time. Turn it to the right a bit, bang your head right into the like button. Join the family. I want to thank you so much for watching.